Shahid Buttar joins us again. It's great to have him here. He's running against Nancy Pelosi, and he recently was one of the two people who won the runoff, the primary. One was Nancy Pelosi, the other was you. So it's great to have you here. So first, let's start with that before we get into a conversation about how you're planning to beat Pelosi in the runoff. Who was your main competition in the primary? Obviously, Pelosi was going to make it into the top two, but no Republican made it. Was a Republican your top challenger or a Democrat?
The next person finishing behind me was a Republican, but frankly, Pelosi was my only competition. I mean, I was the leading among the progressive challengers in 2018. And so the 2020 cycle was our opportunity to consolidate support across the progressive base in San Francisco. And it was really a question of how much ground could we carve into the speaker's previous majority.
Have you seen an increase in support between 2018 and 2020?
Vastly so. In fact, orders of magnitude. In 2018, I was fortunate to be supported by about, we had under 1,000 donors in 2018. We have 18,000 donors this year. We had 33,000 voters last month, or I guess it was 2 months ago now, at the beginning of March, cast votes for us. And we've had thousands of volunteers plug in on the campaign. So the support this time around is frankly vastly beyond anything I've experienced before. It's very humbling, and I'm very deeply grateful to the thousands of people that are fueling our campaign and extending it across the city.
What were the numbers?
It was rough. I mean, we were hoping to come in closer to 25%. We got 13% of the vote to Pelosi's 72, which is to say we have to double our vote count twice between now and November. And thankfully, we have a chance to do that. We've got 6 months left in the race. And while the pandemic, frankly, did punch a hole in our field plan, we can't do events, we can't knock on doors, we have pivoted to the phones. And we've got hundreds of people on the phones for us now. We anticipate that phone banking community expanding into the thousands between now and November. And as the cycle proceeds, I think there will be a great many Americans, we've seen this already in the last few weeks, outraged and frustrated at not having an outlet for our electoral aspirations, and particularly with Bernie Sanders' position in the presidential race shifting, a lot of voices around the country are flocking to our campaign, recognizing the opportunity to vindicate the movement for a humane future by removing the architect of the corporate Democratic Party.
Any chance that Pelosi is going to agree to debate you?
Well, I'm looking forward to debating her, and if she shows up for work, she will. It has been 30 years since she debated a challenger, and some might describe that as an abdication. The very first responsibility of an elected official, someone auditioning for public office, is to defend your record. And frankly, Speaker Pelosi's record is indefensible. I think that's one reason she might not show up to defend it. I think another is simply that her team knows that if she were to try to show up to defend her record, it would be an unfortunate event for her campaign, because it would be between her record being indefensible and our critique being both very grounded in fact and unfortunately sharp. I wish that she had done a better job over the last generation showing up for San Francisco's values, but San Francisco hasn't had a voice in Congress fighting for our city's values in over a generation. For instance, there's a housing crisis here, and it predated the pandemic. Ilhan Omar has a bill to cancel rents and cancel mortgages. Nancy Pelosi does not support it. And in some respects, that shouldn't surprise us. She's a wealthy landlord. Of course, she doesn't support a measure to cancel the rents. But going back before the pandemic, this affordable housing crisis that we had going back years was one in which Nancy Pelosi was demonstrably complicit. The federal spending on affordable housing collapsed over the prior generation. And whether we look at it through housing costs, whether we look at it through peace and justice, whether we look at it as defending human rights or defending immigrant rights, on none of those issues has Nancy Pelosi proven helpful and defensive of our city's interests. The fact that she's so allied with the Beltway and with Wall Street is why we're going to replace her in November.
Shahid, what do you mean she's a wealthy landlord?
So Nancy Pelosi is worth over $100 million. She earns over $1 million a year in rent. And as a renter who owns no property, I'm an immigrant to this country. I don't have a family legacy. You couldn't pick two figures on opposite sides of the socioeconomic continuum. And on the one hand, I've been very fortunate to enjoy any number of privileges. I had a chance to study and teach briefly at Stanford Law School 20 years ago. in addition to those educational privileges, I've had a chance to lead nonprofits and work at some very other prolific ones like the Electronic Frontier Foundation. But I'm not a wealthy person by any stretch. I don't own anything. And Nancy Pelosi was born with a silver spoon in her mouth to a politically powerful family on the East Coast. Her principal qualification for Congress when she ran for the seat she's occupied ever since was that she was a Democratic Party fundraiser. I've been an issue advocate for 20 years. I was one of the first advocates in the country promoting marriage equality, the right of consenting adults to marry a partner of their choice. Speaker Pelosi was 10 years later for that fight. I fought the surveillance state, which she has architected. I've tried to defend human rights that she has been complicit in eroding. And on all these different issues, unfortunately, I see the interests of a city that is long privileged, not just the underdog, but rights, liberties, civil rights, human rights. These are the interests that Speaker Pelosi hasn't seen fit to represent. And whether we attribute that to her class interest or we just attribute that to the fact that she's been in Congress for 30 years and, seems not to feel the need, for instance, to debate challengers, that degree of entitlement, I think, is unfortunate, especially given what so many Americans are grappling with right now. It is a struggle for millions of Americans to pay their housing costs, to put food on the table, to go to work, without getting sick and putting their families at risk. And, Congress isn't showing up for these issues. And I do think it's fair to consider if these policies might be different were the Democrats not led by someone who is themselves part of the 1%.
So if there's anyone else in the press watching this, a national media reporter who just can't believe how unreasonable you are, demanding all of your purity tests, et cetera, what would be the case you would make to them for why she is not a good representative of the progressives of that district?
Nancy Pelosi governs a lot like Donald Trump. She governs by theater and photo op. And I don't think governance is an adequate, you can't replace governance with theater. Theater is not an adequate substitute for governance. And ripping up a speech or pointing sternly across a table or putting on her sunglasses sternly as she walks out of an office wearing her red coat, all of these are photo ops effectively. And as her constituent, I would much rather someone show up with votes, right? I'm not interested in her photo ops. I want someone who's going to vote against the Patriot Act, someone who's going to vote to stop the Iraq War, someone who's going to vote to cancel the rent, someone who's going to vote for Medicare for all, someone who's going to vote for the Green New Deal. She doesn't support any of those things. She's part of the continuing cover-up into CIA torture. She refused to impeach President Bush. With President Trump, she waited a year and then limited the impeachment inquiry. The reason Trump is still in office is because Speaker Pelosi showed up for the impeachment struggle like a prize fighter throwing a fight. And I don't say this as a Monday morning quarterback. I wrote the case a year before she showed up explaining how to bring Trump down. And the key is to impeach him for corruption. And she never did it. She affirmatively refused to allow corruption to be part of the impeachment inquiry. Why? Could be because it's a bipartisan offense. But the point of the matter here is that she did not bring the charges that would have been successful. And I see every one of Trump's litany of crimes against our republic as ones in which she is also culpable, not only because she failed in the impeachment process, but let's just expand the zone here. She supports Trump's corporate trade policy. She supports Trump's military budget. She supports Trump's foreign policy and the right-wing coups in Venezuela and Brazil and Bolivia in the last year alone. She funded Trump's concentration camps. Pelosi unilaterally imposed the PAYGO rules. That's a GOP method of fiscal accounting that undermines progressive spending on health and human services and disproportionately advantages military industrial corruption, which Speaker Pelosi is also thoroughly complicit in. There's never been a war that she hasn't voted to fund. I see, unfortunately, the divergence between Speaker Pelosi's rhetoric and reality as disqualifying. And to the press people who might not understand it, the people who are hoodwinked by the partisan spin, I would go back to their own interests. And government transparency is a value in which many journalists, at least the ones who understand the values of their profession, that they value. And Nancy Pelosi is the figure in the House who has imposed the set of House rules that deny most members of Congress access to the staff with security clearance that they would need to conduct independent oversight of the executive branch, which is to say Nancy Pelosi is an agent of the same executive secrecy that hid NSA surveillance from the American public, that hid CIA torture from the American public, that hides Who knows what crimes of the Trump administration from us even today, when you have a congressional leader who is supporting the executive branch, particularly what's an executive branch led by a Republican aspiring tyrant. That is absolutely unacceptable, particularly in the seat representing America's most progressive city.
See, I have a wild theory on why she might not want to bring up corruption or support some of those right-wing policies that you mentioned. $720 million in campaign donations over the course of her career. Call me crazy. But by the way, the press does. The rest of the national press says, no, $720 million would never affect anyone.
Right.
Good reporting. Makes sense. Anyway, we're out of time. So last two questions are super quick. Yeah. Where can people reach you? And do you also have $24,000 worth of freezers?
Folks can find us online at shahidforchange.us. I live with a roommate in the Haight-Ashbury. I have 1 bedroom in a 2-bedroom apartment. You know, our kitchen is what used to be the add-on to the back of our apartment. So no, I don't have a fancy kitchen. You know, I don't have a dishwasher. I'm a working class American, and I'm grateful for the chance to represent our movement as I seek the chance to represent our city. It's always great to be with you.
It's great to be with you, but I don't know how you're going to make it into Congress without eating designer ice cream. But okay, to each his own. Thanks for joining us again. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Cenk.
Thanks for watching this free clip of the Young Turks. Don't forget to become a TYT member today. For more exclusive content, join now at tyt.com/join.